Hello everyone, and welcome back to another new video. This time we're going to introduce a couple new members to the SQL library for Allen Bradley, and those are the SQL Store and Forward. So as the name suggests, and as we can see in here in this little architecture. So the idea is if for whatever reason we lost connection to our SQL server, then what will happen is the SQL store will buffer the data into the SD card of our PLC. And then once the connection is back and established, we will push that data or forward that data back to the SQL server, so that way we don't have any gaps in our data inside the SQL server database. So with that being said, let's start. So what I have here, I just have a very simple table with 3 columns, so timestamp value and then just the ID of each row. So it's really very simple from the database standpoint, and this table lives under this database, and it's called table number 2. So as we can see right now, I'm going to execute it. It's empty, it has no data in it right now. So I'm just going to jump into the PLC so we can have a quick look at that. So what I have here is I prepared the insert function in here, and what we're going to do first, we're just going to basically insert some values, and all I did here, I'm just reading the time, and then I'm just sending that time to the first column, which is this one right here, and then I'm sending the value, which is simply just the milliseconds divided by 3, just to generate some random value to store into that table. So the first thing we're going to focus on in this first video is inserting the values, and then we are going to interrupt the connectivity, and then we're going to see how the SQL store going to basically have all that data backed up into the SD card. Okay, so all I have to do here, everything looks good and healthy. I just have to trigger this bit here, and as we can see here, our function is verified, and we are already logging data to our table, as we can see here, into this with this counter in here. So if we switch back to our database here and we execute the query, we can see that we're already logging the data in here. So we're just going to give it a little bit of time to log for us, few rows. And if I switch back to the PLC, we can see this is going so 40 and so forth. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to interrupt this process, but before doing so, I'm going to show you first the SQL store. So it's in this routine here. So what I have here is basically in the first rung in here, all I'm doing is I'm just pushing the query from the insert to the SQL store. So when the connection drops, this bit will drop, and then we are going to be basically triggering this in the every second, which is what this timer is set to, as we are logging a query every second to our database. And then in here, the SQL store, we already have some setup to do, so it looks similar to the other blocks, except it has some other functionalities and so forth. So in here we already set up the slot number to 0, since this is a compact logic, so that's fine. And then in the max log size, what that means is, like, how much data do you wanna, how big is your file that you're creating in your SD card need to be to back up your data. So I just specified here 50, so it's 50 kilobyte, but we can have we can have more. I mean, the SD card is 1 gigabyte, so we can have more than 50 kilobyte per file for sure. Or if we leave it as 50 kilobyte, we can certainly generate multiple files of 50 kilobytes. So the other thing we have here, just a timer delay to help out when we have like multiple function executing, so we don't basically have overlaps and things like that. The next parameter here is the file name, so that's the name we want to give to our log. So I'm just going to call it SQL Store, and it's just going to be a text file. Maybe I'll add a number here. I mean, you can certainly auto-generate this name as well based on date and things like that if you want. I'm just going to call it 01. And then the parameter here is query to store. So as you can see here, it's already populated with the insert, and that's just coming from rank 0. So that's about the settings we need to do here at this stage. And then as you can see here, I've already created this rank, so we can trigger this store. So every time this goes to 1, that's mean we're going to store that query into our internal buffer, as this actually has an internal buffer, and then from there it's going to basically push that data to the SD card. There's lots of functionality that this UI can do, but for this first video we're just going to keep it simple. So we're just going to focus on the core function that the SQL Store can do for us. Okay, so let's go back to our insert here for a second. Okay, so we have 268 and 69, and if we go to our SQL database, so that's somewhere in there. So I'm going to interrupt this process now, and we're going to see that in here, because we're going to see the process will get interrupted. So I'm just going to plug simply the cable to the PLC, which I just did, and then what's that going to do is going to basically create a COM error. And then if we go to our SQL, let's see what we have here. So we have 292 queries, 292 queries. And now if we go back to our PLC, so we have 292 in there, and we can already see that we have COM errors, as we can see here. Now if we jump to our store, we can see that the store is already active, as the bit here turned on, so we are already logging the data in here. Now if we basically expand this a little bit, we can see for right now everything is 0 and why not. But one way to tell that we are certainly buffering data at this stage, if for this stage, just after a little bit, once the internal buffer it get full, this will update and all that stuff. But even at this stage, we can certainly open up this internal buffer, and we can already see that we have data in here. And you see here, like, this is all zeros, and it's going to be filled in. There we go. So as we go, okay, so right now what we are doing is we're going to leave this to basically store the data for us inside the SD card, and once it reached that 50 kilobyte that was specified in here, then this will stop. This store file will be active, will be on, and then the storage will stop. And at that point, I mean, it's up to the user to, to do whatever next. I mean, you can certainly say, if this is full, I want to create a new file, and that simply just have to put a new name in here. You just specify new name and then reset, and then the storage will continue again, and then another 50 kilobyte will be created, and you can keep going that way, until connection is restored, and then you can start pushing the data back to the SQL server, which is something we're going to see in the next video. So right now, I'm just going to open up this one here so we can see what's the status. So we're still basically filling up our internal basically buffer, and right now we're basically storing one query every second. So if we look at our query here just to get an idea, so this query is about 85 bytes, so essentially 85 bytes every second, and this internal buffer, it's around the 30 kilobytes, as you can see in here. So it takes probably about 5-6 minutes to fill in this first one. So I'm just gonna speed up this video so we don't have to wait for 5-6 minutes here. Okay, so as we can see now, this is the first block has been pushed in. So we can see that so far we have pushed 341 queries. It's about 29.956 kilobyte. So and it's going to keep going until we get to 50 kilobyte in here, and then it will stop. And this output here, it's going to be also on, indicating that the store it's full, or it has met its target. So we're going to give it a few minutes again to get to that 50 kilobytes. Okay, so as we see now, we got to our 50 kilobyte. We have pushed 570 queries that we basically backed up to our SD card. And as we can see here, it says the store is full, so it stopped storing to the SD card now. Even if there is some more coming, they're just going to be ignored right now. So now that we have this stored, let's do a little check of what we got in our SD card. So I just pulled the SD card from the PLC, and I'm just putting it in my PC here. So we can see here's our file that I named, about 50 kilobyte. If I open up this file, so here's all the queries that they were going to the SQL, but now they are backed up here in this text file inside our SD card. And then also, if we go all the way to the end, we can see here 570 right there, and that's the number that was reported by our EY. So that's basically telling us that everything is good, everything here looks good, and ready to basically pushed to the SQL server once that connectivity is back. Now notice, as I took also the SD card, this SD card present is turned off. So that's also in there inside the UI to let you know whether you have the SD card or not. So if I take the SD card now back and put it in, now it takes a couple seconds. There we go. Now the SD card, it turned back on, telling us that the SD card is in here. So that's it for the for this video for the SQL Store, just to keep it simple. I hope that was very informative, and I will see you in the next video.